Okay, I think we're going to get started. Welcome to the online closing and final artist conversation that will wrap up our first major virtual exhibition, Life During Wartime, Art in the Age of the Coronavirus. I am Margaret Miller, Director of the Institute for Research in Art, which is comprised of the Contemporary Art Museum, Graphic Studio, and the Public Art Program. The Institute is part of the College of the Arts on the University of South Florida's Tampa campus. While the virtual exhibition Life During Wartime is officially closing, you may still review the submissions of 54 established and emerging artists, many working internationally, invited to participate by our curator at large, Christian Vivros-Fonet. The exhibition began in June, and over the last 6 months, Christian has added artists every few weeks. I want to thank Don Fuller, new media curator, and Mark Fredericks, executive assistant and communications coordinator for the Institute, for working on both the technical aspect of creating a virtual exhibition and managing the 9 artist conversations presented as part of the exhibition. The conversations are still available for you to review online. If you haven't already visited the website, the address is very simple. It's lifeduringwartimeexhibition.org. Without a major grant from the Andy Warhol Foundation and major sponsorship from Stanton Store, Embrace the Arts Foundation, and other grants and community support, we would be unable to realize projects of the significance of Life During Wartime. This project has received international press and articles are posted on the website. I hope you'll review them. Today's program is particularly exciting as Christian Vivros-Fonet, the curator, is taking us to Richard Mosse's studio in New York City. I had the privilege of being introduced to Richard Mosse a couple of years ago by Christian and visited Richard's studio to see his impressive infrared film installation, Incoming, that documented waves of immigrants traveling from Africa and the Middle East to Europe. Today, we will be introduced to Richard's latest project that is in progress, titled Double Blind, that takes on global warming as its subject, and it was filmed in the Amazon, which is often characterized as the lungs of the planet. We are going to learn about his unique and highly innovative technical approach, orthographic, multi-spectral reflectance imaging. Christian and Richard will be joined by filmmaker Trevor Tweeton and composer Ben Frost, Richard's collaborators on the project. At the end of the studio visit, our own David Waterman, Chief of Security and synthesizer of questions, will pose your questions to the panel. As you think of a question, please post it on Facebook Live or in the Q&A on Zoom. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our brilliant curator at large, Christian Vivros-Fonet, who conceived and implemented with our great team at the USF Contemporary Art Museum, Life During Wartime, Art in the Age of the Coronavirus. Christian?
Thank you, Margaret. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last of our artist conversations.
Can you get your mic going, Christian?
Oh, sorry.
You're muted too.
That would be, am I muted? Can you hear me now?
No,
You're good. You're good.
Okay, great. So thank you again, Margaret. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the last of our artist conversations for our virtual exhibition, Life During Wartime, Art in the Age of Coronavirus. This one, I can tell you, is going to be special. Not only is this our last artist conversation, but we have a treat in store for you. Instead of speaking to you from my dining room table with a view of my white blinds and a replica of Dave Hammond's African-American flag, as I've done now on 8 previous occasions, we get to broadcast live from inside a real artist studio. That artist being, of course, the celebrated filmmaker and photographer, Richard Mosse. I'm speaking to you now from his place, a warehouse-sized studio that you'll see in a minute. That's part exhibition space, part film development center, at least for now, part bookstore, part coffee house. Richard will explain that later. It's located, as Margaret mentioned, in New York City in the Ridgewood section of Queens. We'll show you the space in a bit and what's in it, obviously. But first, a few words about life during wartime. The act of bringing down the curtain on an exhibition is usually an opportunity for stock taking, but perhaps never more so than at this time and with this show, at least for the folks at USFCAM. It's been, shall we say, an interesting 8 or 9 months since Margaret and myself and the team first began conceptualizing what a virtual exhibition might look like, especially one absent a physical analog. The phrase, building the plane as you fly it, comes to mind. It does, if doing entire shows without actual objects and human beings circulating through real space might have once seemed like a stretch, or maybe something less than a fruitful exercise, COVID-19 kind of set us right. Along the way, we learned a lot. Among other things, that there are advantages to every crisis if you just learn where and how to look. We also learned, though, that certain problems aren't merely a matter of perception. Is the glass half full or is the glass half empty? But that there are instead, like the Atlantic Ocean and Mount Everest, statements of solidly unassailable fact that glass is broken. In such a context, groups of words are more than just opinions or slogans. They become highly demonstrable truths. There is institutional racism in this country. Masks save lives because they are the best known prophylaxis for the coronavirus. Medical science is real, as are climate science and global warming. The next global crisis that is just around the bend and frankly, very much with us. Today, global warming, not rain or isolated flooding, affects major US cities like New Orleans, Houston, Miami, Tampa, of course, as well as countless other cities and countries around the world. It's only too fitting then that we close out the event associated with Life During Wartime by talking with Richard Mosse and 2 other guests. Richard's collaborators, the cinematographer Trevor Tweeton, who's going to be joining us on Zoom from LA, and the composer Ben Frost, who's coming to us from Reykjavik. Together, they've been working on, frankly, a Herculean project that they've christened Double Blind. It's putative subject, global warming as seen and experienced from inside the whale, the Amazon basin, AKA, as Margaret mentioned, the planet's lungs. This is a sort of Gesamtkunstwerk, or a highly multidisciplinary work of art for those who aren't familiar with the German term. It's once a film score, a set of photographic prints, and an immersive installation. Double Blind is also a multi-year project devoted to visualizing that which is almost too vast to see, the environmental catastrophe that causes climate change. Much as he has in past films and photographs, Richard and crew employ specialized films and cameras to help them and others see past the deadening effects of image overload. For Double Blind, he and Trevor Tweeton have fabricated a drone-mounted multi-spectral camera of their own design. We'll show it to you in a minute, thereby harnessing a medium used by mining companies, agribusiness, and land developers, as well as climate scientists, to make what they call, or are calling, multispectral maps. You'll see some of these multispectral maps in a minute, both as images that Richard will share with us on his computer, but also arrayed around the walls of the studio behind me. But before I introduce Richard, let me just prompt you. You're about to get a sneak peek into the process of making a major work of art that will soon be in museums around the world. It's too soon to tell you which ones, but shortly you'll see some of the fruits of Richard's and Trevor's and Ben's vision. In my view, few other efforts today capture where it feels like, what it really looks like to live life during wartime. For those who don't know Richard's work and career yet, his bio is way too long for me to read in its entirety, but I'm just going to give you some highlights. Richard's work has been the subject of recent solo exhibitions at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, the National Gallery of Art in Washington, the Barbican Art Gallery in London, the National Gallery of Victoria, Melbourne. Some of his recent exhibitions include the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art in Seoul, the Denver Art Museum, the Hamburger Kunsthalle, the Museum für Moderne Kunst in Frankfurt, the Victoria and Albert Museum, and the International Center of Photography. He has been the recipient of the Pictet Prize, the Deutsche Börse Photography Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Shifting Foundation Grant, the Yale Poynter Fellowship in Journalism, the Frankfurt Biennial B3 Award, a grant from the Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, and a Leonore Annenberg Fellowship. He represented Ireland at the Venice Biennial in 2013, which is more or less around when we met. And he's also published 6 books. His latest, The Castle from Mac Books, was selected as one of the New York Times Magazine's top 10 photo books of 2018. Those were just the highlights. Now, without further ado, our host today and the artist of the hour, Richard Mosse.
Thanks,
Give me a
Christian.
minute.
It's the grand reveal here. So Christian's going to move out.
Exactly.
Camera
Get
pan
all my
back.
gear.
So thank you very much for joining us today. I've known Christian since I think 2011,
That's right.
when you curated the Dublin Contemporary Art
Correct.
Biennial.
Correct.
It's a long, enduring friendship.
Yes, we have through 3 major projects of yours. But let's talk about Double Blind. Let's go immediately into it. We were just talking a minute ago about the title. Tell me a little bit about the title, which you say is a working title. You just
Yeah.
corrected me, but
Well, before you ask me about my title, I'd like to commend you on your title, Life During Wartime, which of course was artfully borrowed from
Yes.
the Talking Heads.
yes,
And it reminds me, a couple of days ago in Columbia University here in New York, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Gutierrez, said a very dramatic presentation lecture on climate change. And he declared that we're currently waging a suicidal war against nature, and that nature always fights back. And that's what we're seeing. The pandemic is one facet of its response. And so this is a massive wake-up call, which has shown also that we can stop jumping on planes every second day,
right.
that we can live a very different way.
Yeah,
Whether or not we take that lesson, or we certainly don't have much time left to.
right, right. Yeah, maybe we shouldn't be so worried about not being in Miami right this minute. Right?
Yeah, relieved.
No, absolutely. And I think, as I mentioned to you in a previous conversation, I mean, if we're fighting a war, clearly we started it against nature. But let's go to Double Blind. So what provoked you to come out with that title? And I know this is sort of the most non-specific general way to get into the conversation, but I also want the layman to sort of like immediately get a sense of the project, and it's vast. So, and it's got many moving parts. So let's just start there. Title.
Can you, before I try to address that, can you just define what double blind means, actually?
Yes, in fact, I looked it up, and if I flip to the right page. Here it is. Dictionary definition. Double blind, a situation in which a person is confronted with 2 irreconcilable demands or a choice between 2 undesirable courses of action. Right?
Right. Yeah. And actually, I came up with this title. It's still very much a working title.
Yeah.
Prior to the pandemic, and also it's used in drug making and testing drugs, vaccines
Right.
also.
But it also suggests to me kind of what you do within the envelope of documentary work, documentary filmmaking, documentary photography.
Really,
Because you seem to inhabit the language and the situations of documentary-ness, but you're always looking to push beyond, and often in an imminent way, by using either strange film stock, using it at cross purposes, or in the case of your current project, using different cameras, right? Cameras that are not, or in fact, inventing a camera in this case, yeah?
true. Yeah. I suppose on one hand, I'm an absolute geek for photography technologies.
Right.
On the other hand, I'm very, a good starting point, I suppose you'd say, in my practice is a frustration with my own inadequacy as a photographer. And I mean that also in an extended way. The limits of photography as a language,
Right.
especially documentary photography, which I regard myself as being one of. I suppose the sort of reductive nature of photojournalism was always a good starting point. And when I'm trying to engage with a given subject matter, I'm always overwhelmed by the complexity of it, and compared to the rudimentary, I suppose, language that I'm dealing with or inheriting or attempting to use and employ. And so I suppose those points of failure within photography are really generative for me in my practice. I'm fascinated by them, the limits of our ability to not just to speak, but also to perceive as humans.
Right.
And
right.
when we talk about global warming, climate change, these are massive abstractions. The things that are happening to our climate are way bigger than us.
Right.
We cannot really see them. We can see instances of them emerging in our life all the time now, tragically. But the processes are really very large.
Right. We picked them up as sort of isolated incidents, not as, we pick them up as weather.
Yeah,
among other
and
things,
weather,
right?
how do you... Yeah, I mean, photography, meanwhile, is such a concrete medium where you have to get the bloody thing in front of the bloody camera,
Right.
and then to press the button. And if you don't do that, it's the subject isn't there in the frame. And in this case, you really can't get a wide enough lens. It's
Right.
so I'm fascinated by that failure, by this real limit, and I wanted to pull back somehow.
So how do you pull back? I mean, both technically and in terms of this project, what did you invent or reinvent to get enough of a view of the subject
Well,
to be able to capture it?
Well, so the title, to go back to it, it's double blind. So there's two things in my mind here, and I'm using two media actually,
Right.
which is a big break for me. Normally, I just get obsessed with one, but in this case, so on the one hand, I began this process a year ago, this project, a year and a half last summer, and I went to the Amazon, and because I was reading like you and I, like everyone else, in the papers about the extent of the scale of deforestation, like the just sheer level, sort of willful burning of the Amazon by not just hundreds of thousands of people, but I think I can say millions of people going out there during the dry season and burning the rainforest. Everywhere I went, all the roads, just tracks and tracks and tracks. For 20,000 miles I drove in the last year, and it's all devastated, charred land. So I initially took a very extinct, hard to find type of photographic film called Kodak High-Speed Infrared. HIE is the term they use. Photographers may have heard of it if anyone's dialing in who's a photographer, but very few people have actually used it. It's so old now. They made it extinct in about 98, 99, 2000. And it's very hard to use. It's very sensitive to heat degradation. So the last place you should take it is to the Amazon. And I thought, well, okay, I had a batch of it. I found it on eBay. And I said, well, I'll take this to the Amazon. And I was acutely aware, of course, that it's extremely sensitive to humidity and to heat. And I was taking it right up to forest fires and making images of the fires with this sort of, I suppose, open-minded, sort of open-ended question, like what sort of imagery will emerge. And the imagery that emerged is a very tactile patina of sort of almost texture of tears and tears and scratches and fingerprints. And
they remind me of Dwayne Michaels' images somehow or other, except they weren't done by the photographer, they're done by the environment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So at least to me, I found this visually expressive in a way of not only, of course, of photography's failure, the limit points of photography's ability to depict this adequately, but also, of course, of global heating, as we call it.
Right.
So at that point, I was like, okay, I'm in the zone, great. But is there a way, I found my limit, is there a way to push beyond it with a separate medium? And I began thinking quite hard about that. I had, luckily, as an artist, the pandemic began and I had a lot of space and time to think and read around the subject. And And then I discovered actually the scientists who monitor global heating and the deforestation, in particular of the Amazon, the groups of scientists, and these guys and girls, they look at they analyze data emerging from special cameras and satellites in space above the rainforest that monitor on a regular basis aspects of what's going on there in terms of the land. And those cameras are what's known as multi-spectral cameras.
Meaning
So
they pick up UV, they pick up.
exactly, they
Right.
pick up at least 10 bandwidths, bandpass of data across from the near ultraviolet all the way through to quite high up in the infrared, including the visual. And so this data can be, I suppose, analyzed by the scientists to tell us all kinds of things, not just how many fires there are and the rate, velocity of deforestation, which of course is a very important thing to find out because these are very remote regions. And these crimes need to be understood collectively to really understand the rate at which we're losing the rainforest.
Right.
But also all kinds of other things like the release of not just CO2, but also methane, for example, and the effect on cloud patterns. And the rainforest it generates its own rain. And it does this through networks of clouds, which often you can't see, but sometimes in the early morning you can actually, if you're flying very early over the Amazon. It's a very special event when you could look down and see a web, almost like rivers in the air. And if we continue, it's thought now, people are saying, scientists are saying, if we continue at this rate of deforestation, within 10 years, we'll have so dramatically disrupted those rivers in the air that the rainforest will begin to kill itself. And it will no longer be able to generate its own rain. And the entire rainforest that we haven't already destroyed will be destroyed automatically.
Is absolutely beyond dramatic.
Yeah, we'll also release tragic levels, catastrophic levels of carbon dioxide and methane, et cetera, from the wetlands and from the forests and from the soil.
Right.
So we really don't have long.
But then this multispectral imaging,
Yes.
The part the part where the double blind sort of comes in terms of your use of that video imaging is also that kind of technology is readily used by mineralogists, right? Gold mines, among other kinds of mining, and agribusiness, and all the folks are essentially, as it were, the villains burning down the house in the Amazon.
Totally.
Right?
Talking heads are getting a lot of play here.
Yeah, well, they're going to get a lot of play today, that's for sure. Come on, indulge me. It's the last one.
Oh, I love it. So yeah, no, indeed. So the medium itself, the multispectral camera technology used by the scientists on board the satellites is also being used by agribusiness to increase profit margins, as an inherent part of these vast farms, ranches. So 80% of the deforestation in the Amazon is emerging from cattle production, from beef burger meat production. There's at least 50 million head of cattle in the Amazon, and they all need something to eat. And the most profitable fodder for cows is soybean, which is a non-indigenous crop to Brazil, to the Amazon. And of course, they have, they can produce 3 harvests of soybeans per year. It's really pushing this soil way beyond its, natural level. Hence, of course, they exhaust those tracts of land, and they need more land. And what do? Of course, you just burn the rainforest.
So you find this technology, right? That in a way, conducts that. It is a great conductor for that contradiction, that imminent contradiction.
At least to me.
And you use it how?
Well, I suppose to me at least, it's fascinating because it sort of carries this agency within the entire series of narratives that I'm trying to depict and represent. And on some level, it is a vehicle for the savior of the Amazon because it allows us to perceive the extent and the emergency of the emergency. At the same time, it's being used widely, you might be surprised to know, by mineralogists to identify rare earth minerals, often inside indigenous ancestral lands, for example, which, according to Jair Bolsonaro, will soon be divvied up amongst multinational mining companies to produce little wedding bands that we all buy. And, as I suppose as a medium, there is this inherent tension right there that fascinates me.
But now I want to get to the mechanics of what you do with it, because we're looking at something, I don't know if we can all see it, but I'm pointing at back
Shall
here. Huh?
Shall we get locomotive?
Yes. Why not? Let's
Okay.
get up and move over there, and we can look.
Or is this, sorry, am I disrupting the?
No, not at
Yeah.
all. Not
Okay,
at all.
okay.
We can do that. I mean, I think part of the charm of this is for folks to see your studio, man.
Cool. We'll just
but
have a
let-
quick look at a few of these guys and then, well, we'll see where that goes next, but
the
Yeah.
machine is right here in front of us. Let's just tell us what we're looking at here.
Right, so-
Because I want to go from the film,
okay.
to this. Like, what is this thing?
Well, the
And
problem,
where did it come from? Because I don't think you went to B&H and bought this, right?
no. So this is a character in our crazy tragicomedy. Now, with the assistance of Trevor Tweeton, who's online and will join us in the discussion quite soon, cinematographer Trevor Tweeton, I spent almost a year racking my brain and beating my forehead against the wall to try to find out how to make a film, an immersive video artwork, using multispectral technologies. And naturally, no one in their right mind's ever done that. So they do make the cameras, very advanced cameras for satellites. They also make small cameras for farmers and agribusiness to be mounted on drones. And they're 10-band multispectral cameras. Those are accessible. They're not cheap now, but they're very light. I managed to get my hands on one, and I've been making these maps in the background.
Right.
These are multispectral maps that reveal indexical traces of climate change through the same processes as are used in the satellites.
They produce these weirdly almost parasitical sort of like colorations, right? Which we'll get to in a minute.
Bacteriological, very strange aesthetic
Right.
impact.
Right. Right.
Now, how to do that in the motion picture? We had to build this baby. So in here, actually, I mean, maybe we should ask Trevor to chime in and talk us through this. Or would that be too complicated?
Sure. No. Trevor, Ben, you want to turn on your mics and your cameras, please? I'm gonna grab my phone and my glasses because otherwise I can't see
Hello.
more. Hi, Trevor. How you doing, man?
Pretty well. How are you, Christian?
Yeah, good.
Good
Good.
to see you guys.
So you had something to do with putting this monster together.
Unfortunately, yeah.
All right, well, walk us through it, and while you're at it, also sort of explain to us how this is manipulated in the bush.
Well, first of all, it's manipulated quite clumsily and laboriously. It's a really heavy piece of machine. So we worked with a company out of Canada that specializes in sort of multispectral imaging, mostly for machine vision stuff and sort of manufacturing testing, and as well as the sort of elements that Richard was talking about in terms of agricultural and that sort of thing. But we spoke to a number of companies, and they were the only ones that were really willing to give us the time of day to just be open to this idea of making this sort of brand new camera that would sort of meet our needs. And it's still very much a work in progress, but essentially it's 4 cameras inside the box with a bunch of different mirrors and beam splitters and different filtration that limit the type of light that's hitting each camera to various spectrums. And from that, they're all single channel, sort of mono black and white images, you could say. And from that, we're going to produce 3 color images, RGB, but sort of false color. So you get these sort of surreal images where the plant life is colorized in a certain way, or for example, minerals, gold, or the plant health could be visualized in different ways that reveal something about the landscape, reveal something about the health, the foliage, that sort of thing. And again, it's still very much in progress, unfortunately. We had some results in the last journey down, and now we're learning more. Richard's been spending a lot of time working with various filters and trying to understand it a little better so that we can use it a little more focused.
But you actually have film footage, because I mean, I haven't seen it, but I've seen it being developed.
We do have a couple shots. We used it a few times when we were down there. We actually filmed in an area called the Pantanal. There were jaguars that have been burned because there was a huge amount of fires there this year. A quarter of the land had been burned. This is a wetland region in south of the Amazon. And one particular jaguar had her paws burned so badly that she wasn't able to basically survive in the field anymore. So she was brought to a sanctuary, and then we filmed the process of them debandaging the paws, sort of cutting open the wounds to help them heal better, and then rebandaging that. As well as we were in a gold mining area, and we filmed process of extracting the gold and using the mercury in order to purify the gold, which then they go in and sell.
But on the other hand, we've also been shooting 35mm anamorphic,
Right. Okay. Right.
which
Which
is an infrared film stock that is actually designed for normal cameras, not
right.
still cameras. I mean,
Right.
but we managed to spool it properly for 35. Well, Trevor has.
Yeah. This is our second party trick here.
And our second character in the studio is,
yeah.
apart from ourselves, is this processor here. So no lab in the world would actually do this for us because it's so laboriously slow. We're developing, because of the nature of the film, we have to develop it very, very, very slowly and very dilute development. And if you want to actually take a look at the processor, which we had to procure, and Matthew, who's currently behind the camera, my studio manager, has figured out how to get these immense amounts of film, many reels, a whole year's worth of shooting, essentially, processed very, very slowly. I don't know if you can see that.
How slowly? Because you mentioned to me exactly how slowly yesterday or a few days ago.
Is it a?
What is it, like 13 hours per reel?
For 1,000 feet.
For 1,000 feet. Yeah. And what's normal processing?
Oh, actually, I don't know.
At least 10 times that.
Yeah, 10 times that. Right. Right. Yeah. Well, that's remarkable. I mean, you guys are obviously sort of like. It's not that you're working at the cutting edge of technology, is that you're refashioning the technology to get at essentially sort of a new, more synoptic view of the problem, right?
And I'm just sorry, we don't have the results yet. We've been trying actually quite hard to get something for you. But Ben Frost, who's also online, he's
yes.
a very celebrated composer and electronic
is.
musician, and he has some results which we will actually listen to at the end of this Zoom.
Yeah, that is going to be our magnificent outro. Yeah, let me just say I've been listening to Solaris for like the last 48 hours. That's a great record of Ben's, which you should all buy, frankly. Shall we look at some of the prints?
Sure. Which would you like to look at?
Matthew, you all right holding everything? Yeah.
This one here, actually, Matthew just composited this one last night and printed it this morning. Now this is from the Pantanal, which, as Trevor said, the entire Pantanal we've lost 25% of. This is a really extremely important wetland region, which has extraordinary biodiversity. This
was quite recently. This was
this
literally
was
in the
only
summer
over the
that they
summer.
were burning, hundreds and hundreds of acres at
This
the time.
year. Yeah. And because of the pandemic, we really haven't seen a lot of reporting about it because of the limits on travel, etc.
Right.
And because as our RAM in the front of our heads is just overloaded with other political,
seemingly more immediate problems.
Yeah, but no. So there's a specific park which is, I believe it's a UNESCO or some sort of a protected, highly celebrated park with the highest density of jaguars in the world, and they've lost, I believe it's 80% of that park alone in 2 months. And a lot of the fires you can't really see because during the dry season. So you have to remember this is a wetland. So most of the year, this is all sort of flooded. Actually, you get a lot of caiman and a lot of giant otters, a lot of wildlife, loads of birds. But because the dry seasons are getting longer and longer because of climate change, this is a parched landscape, and the fires are spreading under the ground. So you're seeing that the root system, which dries out, the fires actually, you can't, it's very hard to fight these fires because it's not like leaping flames as you see in California. In the Pantanal, mainly the fires are actually burning under the soil itself. So you have to, in order, it's quite almost pathetic. They've got a team of guys, pre-Fogo, with Brazilian firefighters. By the way, Bolsonaro just defunded
That
and
is
castrated this
right.
group.
Those are the firefighters. That's a fire truck.
Yeah, you can see there's the 3 guys here and 1 guy managing the pump. It's very small details, but
Again, I want everyone to understand that this is an aerial shot.
yeah,
That
Sorry.
because it's disconcerting at first, right? That you took with the drone.
yes. So
Yes.
what I'm doing is I'm using something called orthography, which is essentially flying the drone in a grid, up and down, up and down, up and down, using autopiloting tech software, which I set in the field, obviously, once I find my subject matter. And over maybe half an hour, it flies quite quickly, about 30 kilometers an hour, taking every second 10 photos in 10 different bandwidths of multispectral data, which then Matthew takes all those pictures, and we process it very, very processor intensive. So we have a very powerful computer to do this. And then that software stitches this landscape together using this orthographic techniques of photogrammetry to create essentially a map. And we then take that map with all that data into a different kind of software called GIS software, which we can use, and this is used by the scientists who look at the data coming back from the satellites, for example, to dial in and reassign the colors to reveal certain aspects of what's happening to the environment.
But it's so crisp, it's remarkable to think of this as a composite picture, but that's precisely what you've just explained. Yeah.
Very much so, yeah.
Yeah.
And here's an indigenous village. It's a Aldeia and a Weninawe near in Mato Grosso, and near some of the most intensive agribusiness, like really hardcore, massive farmlands, producing huge numbers of cows, etc. So they live just as they've always lived. And I suppose this, for me, is a very powerful image because it shows a different sort of way of living and engaging with the environment. You know, obviously, they do actually burn the rainforests. You can see some of the rainforests being burned, but they live in a very sort of sustainable, cyclical way. They eat fish from the river, and every 15, 20 years, they will exhaust this little piece of land. So they'll move the entire village or aldeia to a different part of, you know, maybe 5 miles away. And so you can actually see, if you look at Google Earth, you can see older villages that have been abandoned, you could sort of see there the ring within the forest, and that's being reforested. So it's very sustainable, organic way of living, with producing very little waste. Very, I suppose, diametrically antithetical to the way we in the West live, which is very rapacious. For example, here's a reservoir. It's like they dammed a river in order to create hydro energy, and it's very destructive to the land. Going back to the indigenous, you know, the Kayapo tribe, you know, they were living off fish, and there's a huge dam called, I think, the Belo Horizonte Dam, that has been a massive catastrophe for the tribes people. They've been not only moved out of their land to create this damned hydroelectrical site into very nasty little sort of settlements in towns, but their whole way of life is obviously over. They can't fish anymore, and that dam, unfortunately, as predicted, because of climate change, is not producing near enough of what they were hoping to in terms of energy. So I think it's at 10% capacity.
I'm astounded how much a picture like this essentially looks like the kinds of images we're used to seeing related to coral reefs. And literally the upending of the camera from, you know, top down rather than sort of like, I don't know, it's remarkable to me. And also the analogies between, you know, the risk factors that coral reefs are undergoing right now, and the Amazon. I mean, the connection.
It's so depressing what's happening to the coral reefs, and that's really, I think they'll all be extinct by the end of our lifetimes. So this is a major polluting mine. It's actually not a mine. It's a refinery for alumina. So they take the alumina, they pipe it into this vast mine, and they process it, and it creates, it's totally disrupted the aquifer. It's near the city of Belém in Pará state in northeast Brazil, in the Amazon. And a lot of these, so you can actually see, it's almost like this giant whale eating this community. This is just the outskirts of a much larger town. And a lot of those people are getting cancer or being lead poisoned. And it's to produce tins that we all use.
Now the color decisions here, how much are you pushing and how much is it the
Simply we're reassigning the colors
Right.
across the data. And at this stage, it's still almost entirely aesthetic, because I'll be beginning a residency with CERN in Geneva and with Serra Pilheira in Brazil. And so this is a sort of joint co-hosted residency.
right? And both of the institutions you just mentioned are hard science institutions that do hard science. One you mentioned in Geneva, the other one is in Brazil.
Yeah.
And they're devoted to doing what?
Well, CERN is actually atomic research, but it's
Right.
the biggest scientific research organization in the world. Its funding is massive. And also Serra Pilheira are, they have all the networks in terms of those teams of scientists who I described. One of them is called Map Biomass, and the other one's called Amazon. These guys are the ones who are helping us to really understand the level of what's happening in the rainforest, to map that.
I mean, one of the things that's sort of so striking about your work in general, both, I mean, incoming was just as complex as the number of moving parts that you've got, the number of plates that you're spinning when you're putting together these kinds of projects. Yeah, I'm always wondering how you keep it together, but clearly you do. Well, what are we looking at here?
This is also in the Pantanal, and also printed this morning by Matthew. And I really like it aesthetically as a form, but this is I suppose a Cayman pool.
Like you can actually see them.
See how many hundreds
Yeah,
of these
there's
essentially little crocodiles.
not a pool you want to go swimming in because yeah, they look like so much spermatozoa from up top, but
They're killers. And then in the dry season, there's very scarce amounts of water. So all the wildlife would come to these ponds. And so it's party season for these guys. Because where's the capybara? I think we got one in here somewhere. Is it up here somewhere? I can't see him.
which is an endangered.
I don't think,
Is it?
Are they endangered? But they're-
I mean, we don't see many of them in the U.S. obviously. But
so
the capybara is what, like a big
giant
rat,
guinea pig,
big
massive,
yeah.
lovely animals.
Yeah.
But so he'd be make a nice meal for these guys.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And here we have whoa, watch yourself.
No worries.
This is an intensive feedlot, with the largest in Latin America. There's at least 40,000 cows being
Really?
fattened up for slaughter.
Wow, so you can actually see the cows.
Yeah. And all that shit gets sort of filtered down these slopes into these series of ponds. And you could actually,
Matthew, can you go up so you can actually see some of this? I told you folks we were going to do a studio visit.
and just as a photographer, like I just want to come back to the basics of it. We're
right.
talking about cows endangering the future of humanity here, right? How do you take a picture of that? Like cows are nice, gentle creatures, and you take one picture of a cow, you've taken them all. Oh, so it's very hard. I'm just trying to sort of break through that to try to show the scale of what's going on in the rainforest. This used to be 20 years ago all primary rainforest, untouched. You can actually go back, if you go on the historic slider in Google Earth. Go back to this region and you could just see these holes emerging about in the early 80s and the 90s. And then by 10 or 15 years ago, just almost all of it's gone, and now it's just this endless expanse of agribusiness lots. And of course, another aspect of it is the mineral, the mining. So
these are the mines.
So these are very, very destructive sort of process of extracting not just gold but also coltan and other minerals from this is the river, actually. This is the Krepori River.
What's coltan used for, by the way?
It's in all our cell phones.
It's in all our cell phones,
MacBooks and-
precisely.
Yeah.
Also mined extensively in Congo, where you
Exactly.
did the enclave.
Yeah, very, very destructive. So here's a boat, for example, that's, if you want to zoom in here, we can see it uses this, you can't see it's underwater, this pipe with a massive grinder. It's literally almost raping the silt and the riverbank and under the riverbed, and just sucking it through these vast this area. It's a very loud, hostile place to be. And Ben has made some incredible sounds, which you'll hear after we close this webinar. Some of them, but so there's a series of sort of trays that the silt is filtered, and then the gold is filtered from there using mercury, which is then
Let's go
often
back and
dumped.
sit down, because I think Matthew's going to
Yeah.
his arms are going to
Okay.
melt. But on the way there, let me just make sure I'm getting this straight. So the 35 millimeter film that you have processing there will essentially look like these images.
No, that will look more like the black and white images, which we don't have hanging, but which
Okay.
are on the Life During Wartime website.
Okay. I did read somewhere, I think in one of your old presentations, which you gifted me, that you were shooting it in super widescreen format, right?
Trevor should really address this.
Right. Now, but before he does, and Trevor, before you chime in, what I read, what you wrote, is that you did it essentially because you saw a certain similitude between the environment there, well, not just global warming, but or a local version thereof, but a certain kind of a Wild West kind of a situation that you wanted to connect to in terms of sort of like film history. Is that right?
Yeah, I suppose
Trevor, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Speak up.
Yeah, so there was definitely the place itself, the Amazon itself, is very much about like cowboys and cows and horses, and it has this very much a Wild West vibe to it. And I think we were trying to reference that with the way that we were working, specifically visually using these anamorphic lenses to create this very panoramic image. And it also really suits the Amazon visually, just because it's a very flat environment. Amazon basin is a sort of really flat wetland. It's not very mountainous. And so you get these really amazing wide landscapes that this format is really, really great for capturing. So it's come together organically, and it really suits it quite well, we found.
And a lot of the farmers, you know, they would have this, many of them come from European stock, and they have this sense of manifest destiny. They have the God-given right to dominate the environment. And, you know, sadly, a lot of it, this ethic emerges from Europe, actually. A lot of them moved to Brazil and the Amazon. And those are some of the farmers who go around with 10-gallon hats and on horseback, riding through this dystopian charred rainforest. It's very, obviously the iconography of the Western is strong, but it's also a disturbed kind of version of it, very almost Ballardian.
I want to get Ben in. Ben, you there? Ben?
Yeah. Hey there.
Hey, man.
Hey.
So, look, I mean, I partly want to touch on the way you guys have collaborated. I mean, the three of you over a significant stretch of time now. How long has it been? A decade?
Yeah.
Right?
A while. Yeah.
Over three sort of, major projects. So, I mean, part of what I want to ask you is like, how you sustain a collaboration like that over a significant amount of time, and more importantly, not more importantly, but more to the now, how do you do that during a pandemic? We mentioned the pandemic sort of like, here and there, but not as an issue for you guys actually going to Brazil and meeting up, which you did, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah, a couple of times now.
And then working through it. How do you guys do that?
And sorry.
No, how do you not only how do you do that, but how do you do that, and how do you contrast that with other times that you've worked together?
I mean, I guess I can only speak for myself, but the nature of kind of what we do as a sort of a team has always sort of has been a kind of a grappling with obstacles in various circumstances, whether they be a lot of it is very much just a series of practical problem solving situations, travel related, visa related, luggage related, and so it tends to be just this kind of ever sort of rolling series of obstacles which we have to kind of work our way around. But the thing that's kind of I think maybe defined a lot of the work that we've done has been a process of aiming at a thing and failing to reach it, and the work has sort of been documenting in one way or another what happened on the sort of the metaphorical or the physical road to that destination. So this last trip was definitely the very, very true to that kind of that idea.
And when was that? When were you guys last there?
Like just over a month ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now tell me about I totally hear you with sort of getting over obstacles, and the ones you're describing now are logistical, but I'm also sort of like wondering about the creative obstacles. I mean, you arrive, at the Amazon, or you arrive in the Congo, or you arrive at some blasted beachhead in Greece, and on your end of the collaboration, what is it you pick up on first to actually begin sort of thinking about your composition?
Well, I mean, I guess there's two parts to it. Like for me, there's the bit where I sort of am physically in space and pointing a microphone at what's in front of me. I'm always sort of looking for a way to find a dialogue with the images that Richard and Trevor are kind of capturing, and trying to find a way, looking back, at Incoming and the Enclave even, there is a kind of a just making like a series of raw field recordings and kind of working in this sort of pure documentary language feels kind of dishonest in a way where the images themselves are kind of working in a way of attempting to reveal a sort of other spectrum or another language that isn't visible, whether that's with the use of aerochrome in the DRC or using the infrared technology which was used for Incoming. So I'm always kind of looking for a way to sort of communicate with those ideas, and what that often ends up meaning is that it becomes a kind of the pure field recording in a way is quite dishonest, in that it just reveals this sort of singular layer, when in fact there's a lot more going on in the image. And so I'm always trying to find an interesting way to kind of to communicate with that. So it ends up being a lot more convoluted. I add extra layers to things. I kind of filter things out. I zero in on very specific frequencies and turn things kind of inside out, in a way that somehow tries to maybe reveal something that you wouldn't otherwise be aware of, and zero in on little details. I'll often walk through a landscape with these sort of noise canceling headphones on, which is it's sort of it's not the way you're supposed to do it as a sound recordist in the field. So I'm very purposefully isolating myself to what's coming through the microphone, and what that often ends up doing is puts me in a place where I'm hearing something that nobody else around me is really concerned with, and I'll often zero on that in a really specific way. For example, you mentioned Greece, being down on the beaches in Lesbos. It's a really chaotic environment, especially when the boats are landing, and there's often a lot of yelling and screaming, and it can be quite horrific. But there is this sort of ever-present background of the Mylar emergency blankets, which people are given as they sort of were getting out of the water and cloaking themselves in to get warm. But that once people start moving again, they inevitably get blown away, and they blow up against a fence, and they gather in little corners, and they sort of sit there, and they just sort of gestate in this quite magical kind of way. And there's this whole sound world that's occurring there.
Like literally the crackle of the Mylar blankets.
Yes, yeah,
Really?
exactly.
Wow,
And
that's
they sort of obviously a very they become part of the landscape in a way that it's very easy to ignore them. And so I'm always kind of looking for details like that.
So what would be the equivalent of the Mylar blanket if you found it thus far? Because I know you guys are literally sort of in the middle of the process. You found it thus far for this project.
So very early on, I sort of you asked about sort of what the dialogue is between us. I mean, one of the things I'm always trying to do is find a new way to kind of talk to these images and have an interesting dialogue there. So I started going a little bit deeper into different ways of recording sound. So our first trip down there last year, I actually went with I took what's called an ultrasonic recorder into the Amazon, which is actually designed to you have this whole spectrum of sound, and everything that's in the ultrasonic spectrum is that which is above our above 20 kilohertz. It's above our threshold of hearing. And there's an entire world of sound that's occurring there that we're not privy to. So this microphone is actually picking that up. It's being processed in real time to essentially pitch down with a very small delay into our below our threshold of hearing, and you then can sort of monitor that sound. So I thought that would be an interesting way to kind of move through the landscape. And of course, because the Amazon is such a biologically rich acoustic space, it's incredible what's there. And we would often be in a situation where I would be listening to something that Trevor and Richard were completely unaware was there. And I'd sort of take my headphones off and say, sort of, listen to this, like, and it's right there in front of you, but you can't see it. And interestingly, the same frequencies that are being picked up in the biological world, in the animal world, some of those same frequency bands are also being occupied by industrial practices. So being in these gold mines, for example, you're hearing this very intense diesel engine environment. Everything is powered by diesel engines. But those engines, actually, we're only sort of hearing the sort of primary, I guess, harmonics of those engines and of those kind of industrial practices. But there are various other things that are going on in there, weird sort of drones and whining sounds that are sort of, they're omnipresent. And ironically, of course, those frequencies are what the environment is being sort of bombarded with. And there are things that exist within that system that are very, very aware of those frequencies, much in the same way that you hear sort of people talking about, nuclear submarines having adverse effects on whale populations. I think the same could be said for the insect and bat populations and bird populations in the Amazon.
Trevor, I'm struck by how much what Ben relays and also what Richard relays sounds to me like this phrase I used before, like flying the plane while you build it. Do you find do you find as you're working through the problem, as you're trying to approach the goal of capturing this subject, do you find that to be the case, that you're consistently sort of like trying to renegotiate your maybe not the final goal, but the methods of getting there?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, getting back to the title, double blind, I mean, in the case of both the technologies that we're using, can't actually see the results of anything that we're shooting, certainly through the cameras, because we're shooting film. And in the case of the 35mm camera, we're using filters that you can't even see through with your eyes, and certainly can't see through with the eyepiece. So we don't really know what we're going to get until it goes through the machine extremely slowly and then gets scanned. We look at it. So we're actually still waiting that, unfortunately. So there's this sort of element of discovery and surprise. We sort of have an idea of what we might want and how it might function, but there's always this process of seeing what you get and then sort of trying to revisit and going back and rediscovering how you can reapply that or change it or change your approach. It's very much a work in progress and reacting to the medium as well as the environment. And in the case of the other camera, the digital multi-spectral camera, we're seeing a bunch of different images that will eventually be composited into one, in the case of the way you see Richard's drone images. But again, in the field, you can't really understand what it's actually doing. You can learn from it and you can sort of start to understand it a bit, but it's always going to be a bit of a surprise. The same went for the work we did with the Enclave in Congo. And even incoming, it was always a sort of surprise what you got when you took the camera out of the box, which is exciting because you're working with new languages, new mediums, and you have a sort of free reign then. You're not burdened by what the implication of the image might mean. You can create this new language, which is exciting, and apply it to this specific subject. In this case, climate crisis.
I mean, improvisation comes directly to mind as a way of defining what you guys are doing. So responding to the medium and the environment, that in Trevor's phrase, I think is a great way to sort of capture, the entire process with you guys. I think we're getting around that point where we should probably go to questions, but I want to give you, Richard, sort of, I don't know, the last word. In one of your earliest descriptions of the project, you invoked Kant. And before everyone goes to sleep, you invoke Kant's mathematical sublime, which is, the idea of something that's so big, right? So difficult to calculate that it has the properties of the sublime. It's huge. Its magnitude is almost too large to fathom.
It's beyond the faculties of our imagination.
Precisely. And I think what you were saying in that proposal or in the invocation of Kant was that part of what you were trying to do through this method of improvisation that the three of you guys have been talking about is to try and basically open up new perspectives with which we can start seeing that thing, right? Calculating the maths.
For sure. The problem being, though, so apologies if it's not very clearly articulated, but I suppose the mathematical sublime was effective in depicting things beyond the faculties of our imagination
Right.
through quantitative use of our reason. In other words, our intellect. And so I suppose Kant's idea was that by understanding, oh, well, that incredibly large cathedral is at least 120 times bigger than me. So there's a quantitative element there in terms of scale. And then I suppose there's kind of failure inherent to the mathematical sublime, a failure of the imagination and a disappointment, which is then, oh, but like I can actually figure it out quantitatively through reason. So there's a kind of strange chicane that occurs. But if you think about climate change, reason has failed us also.
Right.
We have all the reports coming in from all the scientists for more than a generation
And we
now,
do nothing,
since
yeah.
the 80s. And we've done not even that. We've done worse than nothing. There's a whole sort of mythology of climate denial that it began as soon as as soon as we realized the climate change was upon us. And I don't know if you remember, but in the 80s, like the right wing here in the United States was in agreement with the left wing. Everyone was unified in understanding this is a problem we have to deal with. And then something happened called climate denial. And this is a series of narratives. It's a problem of storytelling. And these narratives are suppose, as mythology is promoted by people in the pockets of very wealthy people who are profiting off the oil and gas industry, for example.
Correct, as they did and as they were, back in the day with tobacco companies, just at a scale which we can hardly sort of fathom now.
And our problem now, of course, it's artists do play a role and storytellers do play a role in trying to correct these narratives, and storytelling is crucial to this effort. But our problem, of course, is that there's a form of broken sublime, because we're getting all the scientific evidence of climate change, and we still can't believe it somehow. We're still not able to respond to it, and I think that's very interesting. There's a disconnect.
There totally is a disconnect. The last thing I'll say before we go to questions is it's a guy named Timothy Morton, who some of you may be aware of, and I've mentioned to you before, and I've just started cracking books on him, but he seems like a brilliant guy. He teaches at Rice. He teaches English, oddly enough, but he's a eco-philosopher. And the mathematical sublime for him, he's sort of he's rebaptized it the hyperobject, right? Which is, again, this thing that's almost too big for us to fathom. And the hopeful thing at some level is that he seems to situate this re-understanding, this re-upping of knowledge with philosophers and artists, right? As folks who can sort of push perspectives, move perspectives farther than their current state, and open up areas of understanding literally by reimagining vision, which is what you guys are doing, right? So unless you think I'm full of BS with that, maybe
No, that's the hope anyway. Whether or not we're effective, give us another year or two.
Yeah. Well, good. Listen, maybe Dave Waterman, it's time for us to go to questions. If we have any, and I hope we do. Dave, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Am I hearable?
Yes, you're totally hearable and viewable.
Thank you. Yeah, a number of questions have come in, and I'll address this kind of by summing a number from one particular viewer, just to kind of distill what the question are about. It seems to be about the potential for artists as activists, and I'll sum up all the questions that were asked in that vein by saying, in what ways do you believe this work could be used to uplift indigenous societies that are highly affected by climate change?
Wow, that's a heavy question, and
a heavy question, but yeah,
and an appropriate one, because I mean I think there is an issue of self-representation to talk through. I oddly enough, I'm on Monday on a Zoom call with an Anglo-Peruvian anthropologist and statistician who has a show on with indigenous artists who work in the Amazon, and the show is all about their experience of COVID-19 within their communities, right? We don't often see those people either opining about COVID-19 or about art, right? But it seems to me that getting their perspective is particularly important when we're talking about sort of, things that are happening literally in their front yard, backyard, house, everything. Right.
For sure. Yeah, I'm certainly not trying to speak for them. And actually, because of the pandemic, I've been very deliberately, carefully avoiding indigenous communities for that very reason.
Correct.
They have a genetically predisposition towards respiratory diseases. So a coronavirus will actually devastate, if it gets to access to these communities, will devastate those populations.
Right. Yes.
So I've been primarily focusing on the agents, the environmental criminals, if you may call them that, who tend not to be indigenous. But what was the question? To uplift what? The
uplift native
indigenous societies
populations
that are featured in the environments of your work.
Not sure really. It's an interesting question. It goes back to a lot of it because, for example, Incoming, which is a previous work of mine, which is dealing with the immigration crisis that faced Europe, that was unfolding all across Middle East, North Africa, and Europe, of course. This was a work made by a European, myself, for a European audience about a European failure, a failure to grant asylum, a failure to welcome these people, a failure to allow them to integrate. So it's really not. I'm not trying to cater to people in Aleppo with that by making that work. It'd be very interesting to show that work there. And indeed, Christian, you may remember I made another work in Democratic Republic of Congo, which took me, Ben, and Trevor several years to make. And after it showed widely across Europe and the United States and Australia, across the world, and on the internet, of course, I managed to get funding by the grace of God to bring it back to Congo. And we brought this very advanced advanced multimedia immersive video. We flew with all these crates of projectors and speakers, and we brought them to Goma, which is the city where the work was made, a war-torn, very insecure African city, very fascinating place. And I invited Christian to come.
They brought their own art critic.
And actually, maybe you could talk about that, the reception of the work there.
The reception, yeah, I mean, it was astounding. We landed with this work, which, as Richard mentioned, had been shown sort of all over the world, or rather shown in the West, right? And it was set down in a place that doesn't have theaters, that has electricity maybe 3 or 4 hours a day. Where most places work with generators, where we met law school students who went to a university that again didn't have electricity most of the time, and the people who sort of poured through the it was a wedding banquet hall that I think you guys readapted to put together the installation more or less the way it had looked in Venice, right, in 2013. And it was all kinds of folks from all walks of life coming in. I think it's important to say that a number of people were dumbstruck. A number of people were angry because it didn't want to present the way that they were represented in the film. And a number of people were amazed, and an equal number of people were understood the fullness of the project and felt touched. We
had people who were like, "Oh, that dead body is actually my uncle."
Correct. There was that.
We had rehabilitated former child soldiers who were only 13, 14, who had murdered people, and they recognized some of the landscapes. Like they said, "Oh, that's Busarungi. I was fighting for the Raya Mutomboki there only 2 years ago, age 11." And it's very obviously disturbing to them, but also a way of, it connected with these very different ways, and that was fascinating.
It was absolutely, it was beyond fascinating. It really was. We got any more questions there, Dave?
Yeah, see if I'll paraphrase this. The way you design your false color images makes them hugely attractive, a pleasure to look at. Could there be a way to create images that instead cause us to experience the visceral disgust and anxiety that we should feel about global warming?
Sure, yeah. I mean,
I think
yeah.
these should a bit, yeah.
I think
I mean,
sometimes they seem like leaching poisonous landscapes, in my opinion. But I also feel very strongly that beauty is a very powerful tool of communicating and storytelling. And I suppose you're welcome to disagree. You know, if you're trying to push the needle and shift consciousness and perception in terms of those stories that we tell about the world and the environment, which I believe is extremely crucial at the moment, if you do so poorly, then it's harder. It's more of a steep cliff hill to climb. And I think that, I suppose, aesthetics, let's call it that rather than simply beauty, is what we do as artists. It's a way we have of making other people feel something in new and original ways. And so that's merely what I'm attempting to do. And in my opinion, some of them are quite disturbing compositions, and I'm hoping to make people feel that.
I'd remit directly to nature. I mean, you know, copperhead snakes look absolutely gorgeous. Nature designed them that way, but they're as venomous as hell. And I think that's essentially sort of what comes through in these photographs and other works that Richard has made. I mean, the aestheticization is there for a reason. It's there to throw you off balance. Images of war are not supposed to, we become very trained to process certain kinds of images because they're all over the place. They're on YouTube, they're on CNN, they're literally everywhere. Even the roughest images. For those of you who love you some darknet. But you know, we rarely get thrown off balance by these images, and sometimes the way to do it is to aestheticize them, to push the envelope on the color, to push the envelope on the composition sometimes, but particularly the color, to upend the way they're taking. You know, maybe the way to take a photo of global warming is to do it, you know, from the skies, as opposed to trying to sort of like get a portrait of a particular tree or as particular landscape that's been burned, or a cow or a particular cow as Richard mentioned. Anyway, that's my take on it.
Yeah, great answer. Great answer. Here's a two-part question. How much time has gone into this project so far? And how long and how much effort do you think will go into the final work?
Yeah, no, so I began with Ben Trevor last September, early September last year. So I suppose we're looking at a year and 4 months or 5 months. And I'm pushing for a debut show. I don't know where that'll be, but spring 2022. So we need, you know, a lot of the hard heavy lifting in terms of figuring out the technology, which we're still engaged in, obviously, but also the fundraising to get that technology and put it in place, such as this processor. And Matthew's been amazing figuring this stuff out, meticulously delivering the goods without destroying the goods. That's all. We've got that sort of almost all the homework done. And I think next year will be a very aggressive year in terms of production and just like pushing the narratives, covering as much ground as possible and interviewing as many scientists and people on the ground, environmental criminals, just gathering a deep understanding of it. So yeah, I'm looking at spring 2022.
Okay, right. 2022 is that what you said? Not to put you on the spot, but
shit, isn't next year's 21?
21, correct.
The year after next year.
Yeah, correct.
One more question, if it's
man. Let's do it.
Have you considered projects similar to this in other parts of the world? Are there other areas you'd be interested in documenting in a similar way?
I'd love to. And actually, Ben was pushing for just make it global, but honestly, we don't have the resources. You know, it's hard enough to get a project like this to look specifically at one sort of subset of environmental catastrophe. And also, I did also worry about totalizing, taking all these disparate they relate on some level, but often, you know, going to Siberia and matching it with fires from the Amazon, they're very different causes, and have, I don't know, I wanted to get more local. I know I'm jumping all across the Amazon, which is a huge area across several countries, but I'd at least be located in one sort of place, and hopefully speak in an effective way about at least that subset of environmental.
Well, I mean, you know, you're literally sort of at unfortunately ground zero for global warming, right? The planet's lungs, as Margaret mentioned.
I mean, Christian, if I may,
yes.
just to that point, I think that, you know, a really important aspect of this for me and for us, I think would be to sort of to really kind of push the point that, you know, at this point in time, this is an international problem. It's an international catastrophe, and you know, at any point on the globe, like Richard mentioned, Siberia, you know, and the release of methane that's coming out of the permafrost there. I mean, that is equally and a sort of horrendous problem. But I think that the sort of the borders have become increasingly irrelevant over the past couple of decades, to the point where the Amazon is, you know, as vast as it is a microcosm of what's happening everywhere. You know, my home country included, Australia. So.
Correct. No, I'm in full agreement with you, and I think I think your capture of the Amazon and your capture of the issue will be seen as a properly sort of synoptic view of the issue at large. You know, it'll be seen as a microcosm and more. Anyway, listen, I think we've gotten to the end of a terrific conversation. We're over, but man, it's been a pleasure, and to the end of you know, the last conversation with Life During Wartime. And I really can't thank you guys enough. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Richard.
Christian, such an honor.
Been a blast, man. A complete honor to do this here with you, and to give folks a sneak peek of the studio as well. What a treat. Hey.
And we're going to end with Ben's track from the illegal.
But before we do that, we're going to have Margaret. Margaret's going to give us the outro. But we are ending with Ben's track, and Margaret will mention it. Thank you guys so much. Cheers. Margaret, you want to come on?
Yes, I'm here. I'll add my thanks to Christian, Richard, Trevor, and Ben for your introduction to Double Blind. I'm very excited to hear that it might be unveiled to the world or offered to the world in the spring of 2022. We hope to participate in Florida with showing this important work. And I know one thought was that you might release it to multiple venues all at the same time, including the Serpentine in London. While the exhibition is coming to a close, that is Life During Wartime, I want to remind you again that there is much to explore on the website, including this conversation, which will be available to you on lifeduringwartimeexhibition.org. I'm pleased to announce that we are producing at Graphic Studio a portfolio of 7 prints created by artists in the Life During Wartime. Christian has written the frontispiece, and we are finishing up production. There will be a few folios available for purchase, so please let us know if this is something that interests you. It will go to our research partners, those people who are collectors that support Graphic Studio. We're going to end today with a selection of audio by composer Ben Frost. And Ben, I so enjoyed your remarks about this and the way you capture sound and hear things that are not available to most of us. So on screen will be a single image from Double Blind, and that image is part of Richard Mosse's submission for the exhibition Life During Wartime. So to all of you who participated today, thank you for attending. I know many of you have followed all of these 9 conversations. And I hope you will continue to follow our programming as we are designing exhibitions that have both a virtual and physical presence. And we found these conversations to be very successful and will be planning to continue them. I hope you have a wonderful holiday celebration, such as it will be. Let's embrace hope and joy at the end of 2020 and look forward to 2021. Thank you all for participating. And here is a sound from Ben Frost. Thank you all.